Hotep, I'm Dr. Gloria Latimore-Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3o Art of Life show. This is part 2 of the Chicago struggle for black political empowerment. I just want to pause before I reintroduce my guests to say that I'm very happy to be here having this conversation with you. I think Bennett may remember this, but at one time when I was a much younger woman, I had some guests in my home. Among them was Bennett Johnson, Dr. Margaret Burroughs, John O'Killens, and I think Gus Savage, just some pretty heavyweight folk. And they were all having this animated conversation, and I was just looking from one to the other because I was just amazed because they were so knowledgeable. They knew all this stuff, and they had all these names, and they had all these events. And of course, I was a young mother of 6 children, and I hadn't been anywhere but at home and to the hospital to give birth. So I didn't really know that much about what was going on in the world. But I vowed that I was not going to let that continue, that I was going to know more stuff. And I'm just happy to be here with some folks like those folks, because now I can be in the conversation. I don't have to just sit and stare from one to the other. But I want to introduce again Bennett J. Johnson, who is Vice President of Third World Press, and Brenetta Howell Barrett, who is the CEO and President of Pathfinders Prevention Education Fund, and Professor Robert T. Starks, who was my colleague before I retired.
Absolutely.
And he's at Northeast Illinois University teaching political science and inner city studies education. And Lawrence E. Kennon, attorney Lawrence E. Kennon, who claims to be retired. But, he's retired. He said he was retired. And so what we're doing now is, go ahead.
You mentioned John O'Killens. I think you said for the public we should let folks know. He was the author of, and then we heard The Thunder.
Yes,
He's a writer.
famous author. And so, imagine having...
And Gus's cousin.
And Gus's cousin. Imagine having...
I didn't know that was Gus's
Imagine having the founder of the DuSable Museum and the Southside Community Arts Center, who had been your high school teacher, sitting in your house, It was just one, and she brought all those people with her, because I had invited her over, and she came, and when I saw her coming up to walk, she had all these other folks with her, and it was just a wonderful thing. So it's wonderful. I'd love to encourage that people get together and have conversation, not TV, don't have a party, don't distract yourself with all kind of nonsense, but actually sit down and talk about something, share some experiences. And my goal here is to just fill in some of the blanks, because our history is so obfuscated by everything that, people tell our story for us, and they sometimes don't get it right. And sometimes it's deliberate and sometimes it's accidental, but in either case, it's not what the story was. So we were talking mostly about the political side of black political empowerment, but we needed to talk about the civil rights and civil liberties part of that thing, because you're not just you're not just interested in an ego trip. You're not just trying to be, king of the hill, have some title and be able to be in some album somewhere. But you want to be an elected public official, hopefully so you can serve, and so that you can serve a constituency which is underserved, which was the black community in Chicago. And so I'm pretty sure that was the motivation for the work that you did, Bennett, the work that we have all tried to do. And Bob has an organization that is dedicated to dealing with the issue of black political empowerment. So where did that come from? Did that come out of what you saw the grown people like myself doing? Were you trying to emulate your elders?
Yes. Well, I've always admired all the people here, including you. And when we tried, actually had to force Harold I think he had already decided he was going to run, but we made him admit it. And we sat at Robert's Motel with Conrad Worrell, Reverend Al Sampson, Lou Palmer, Georgia Palmer, Tim Black, and all of us. And we were saying, look, Harold, you got to run. Is he going to run? And so we came up with the idea of having a parallel organization to the campaign, because we knew that Harold couldn't run as a black candidate. He had to run for the whole city. So we was, and I think it was Al Sampson came up with the idea that what they had done in Cleveland was have a parallel campaign to the campaign of the first black mayor elected in Cleveland. So then I think it was Conrad that said, well, let's call it the Task Force for Black Political Empowerment. Great. And they said, now who's going to head this up? I looked at me and said, you do it. And so we headed it up, and it was Mercedes Millette and I
remember Mercedes.
was given the responsibility of coming back with a plan. And that next Tuesday night, we came back with a plan at the Center for Inner City Studies, room 401. We came up with the 80-80 plan. We said if we could get 80% of black people who are registered to vote to come out and vote, and if we get 80% of that vote, we'd win. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened.
Let me go to the backside of Harold's running for mayor. Actually, in 1975, we had the Committee for Black Mayor.
Exactly.
And
meeting at what is now called the Charlie Hayes Center.
That's right.
At that time, it was
Packing
the Packing House. Exactly.
And so we got a group together headed by Dr. Howard, Dr. T.R.M.
T.R.M. Howard, who was the great safari doctor who had his big office with all his stuffed animals in it.
And was hated by the anti-abortion people.
That's
Right.
That's right. Until
I'm
they
going to tell you what
passed
he
the
said
law.
about that.
And it included a pretty good group of guys. I can't remember them all now, but most of them were.
Charles Hayes was one of them.
Well, not at the table. He wasn't at the table. But anyway, the point was that, I'm sorry, you're right. He did come later. Yeah. In fact, we had a lot of meetings at his place. And so it was, I had been working down in the Bahamas for Muhammad Ali and Herbie Muhammad. And the CIA stopped that deal. So that's another story. But anyway, I came back to see Dr. Howard, how they were doing, and he told me that Leon Finney was his exec for the Committee for Black Mayor. I told Doc, I said, you got to get somebody else.
All right.
And so, since I had a long relationship with him, that's how I became the exec for the group. And it's kind of a long story, so let me just cut to the chase about Harold. After Metcalf backed out, and we had Metcalf not only could have won, but he told us that he wanted us to raise $150,000 in 2 weeks. And
Who told you?
Huh?
Who told
Metcalf.
Metcalf.
And the guy in Detroit, Coleman Young.
Yeah, Coleman Young.
And his entire campaign had spent $300,000.
Right.
His entire campaign. But we raised $150,000 in 2 weeks. And so we had a PR guy whose name I can't think of, who had worked with Percy and with Kerner, who were top flight PR guy. We had
You need to call people by whole names. Percy.
Governor Otto Kerner and Senator Charles Percy.
Thank you very much.
Republican.
So we knew we had all the pieces together, right? So then Metcalf backed out. And what we found out happened was that Houlihan, James Houlihan, now the assessor, his wife worked for Jim Thompson. The former governor, Jim Thompson, was the attorney general at the time. And they told Metcalf that if he ran for mayor, because Metcalf had been head of the housing committee for the city council, and about 3 or 4 guys had already gone to jail from that committee. They told him that he would be indicted. So, not only did he have to get out, he'd have to endorse William Singer,
Mm-hmm.
who was running for mayor at the time, and that's what Metcalf did. So Harold,
Well, now what that pointed out to you, and that struck me, that Thompson, Republican, right, supporting the Democrats.
that's
Isn't
correct.
that interesting?
They worked together.
They worked together.
And so after that campaign, I told Harold, I said, look, I'm through with this stuff. I said, the only time I'm going to work for anybody is for you, and then you should have been there. You know, we went at it quite a bit. And so then this push for mayor came up for him. And
But remember now, go back to 77, 2 years later.
yeah, where Gus ran his campaign and ran it in the ground. Oh, that was awful. I don't even want to talk
Now,
about
see,
that.
I don't agree with that.
Oh, yes, he did.
No, I don't agree.
Oh, yes, he did.
I
He
think
got Victor
that
Gracia
was the
involved.
launching pad. I think that was the launching
That was a
pad.
launching pad for.
And
Well, it was a launching pad, but it was a bad launch.
Well, I don't think he and many other people expected that he was going to be totally victorious in that campaign. But
He could
I
have done
think
better.
it did create some benchmarks and some achievements, not the least of which was training all these green people.
And I was one of them.
But no, that's true. But here's what you got to understand. In 1959, Lemuel Bentley, unknown with no money, got 75,000 votes.
I'm appreciating that
In the primary.
100%.
More than the Republican candidate for the
Right.
same office.
That's right.
Right.
And, but here's where I'm headed with it. Forget it. Okay.
So
good
what
77
happened?
campaign.
But what happened to all those people who were organized for that campaign?
Which one in 75?
For the
79?
Lemuel Bentley campaign.
Well,
See,
Marion
59.
Stamp was one. Corey
Okay,
Brown was one.
but
I mean,
I'm trying to create a picture or get a picture for myself. What happened to that reservoir, that treasure trove
that
of
is
people?
the foundation upon which everything has been built since then. The people who learned, became sophisticated, realized they didn't have to vote straight Democrat. All this was part of this whole growing
Okay,
process,
and-
including
But let her
the
finish
But
your
that
point.
was to me, that also fostered and helped create and sustain a certain level of leadership.
right.
But I guess what I'm saying is, okay, if there were 70,000 people who cast those votes for this wonderful independent black candidate, what happened to at least 50,000 of them? And I think that's something we have to always look at is we do some wonderful feats of organizing and gathering people together, but sometimes we kind of leave them hanging by the side of the road. And I mean, sure, there's a tier of leadership here, and most of these people have done well individually and collectively in some fashions or other. I mean, I think all the experience I got and gained through the various campaigns that I've either supported or been a candidate for led me to be a member of the cabinet of 3 mayors and an Illinois governor, and I doubt that I would have had that experience without what happened before. But I do think that sometimes we just get tired after these enormous efforts and maybe we just have not quite put forth enough effort to making sure that all these young folks.
I don't think we have
You're
a
saying-
full grasp of process.
Yes, and she's
Because
saying
you see,
follow-up,
the
really
victory,
is what-
the victory, is that's just a step in the process.
Right.
Because we never could have gone from Harold, Washington, to where we are now if we had kept the momentum going from what we had already accomplished. Not in Chicago, that could not have happened.
Well, see, the problem is you have to have an organization, and having an organization, you have to have money. There's a lot of things you have to have, which didn't exist. Also, because in '59, for example, it was not only the problem of raising money and organizing, but there was the incessant left-wing, communist, radical kind of smear all along that period of time. We recycle into the protest of the polls thing, which elected a number of people, Sammy Rayner, Anna Langford. I mean, there were a lot of successes. But unless you have some kind of apparatus, now I thought that when Harold was elected that he was going to put an independent thing in place, and he got the wrong people involved in it, and it didn't go anywhere. So, and then of course, at that point, see, one of the problems is, at one point you have to realize that you're no longer outside of the house. As an independent, you're outside of the house, so you have certain tactics that you get involved in. But once you're in the house, you got to change your tactic, because I tried to get Harold to take over the Democratic Party. And
He
I
said
think
he didn't want to do it.
That's right, but he's finally moving in that direction because that was that fleeting speech. But I want to get back to something because
77. Let's go back to 77. And
that's
because
wrong.
I think Brenetta's point is well taken. That was the first mayoral campaign that I worked in, was 1977 in Hyde Park, manning phones, getting cussed out, but saying vote for Harold Washington. And it was a whole bunch of us around that transitioned right into the 82-83 campaign.
That's right. Yeah.
That's
But we
the
went
point.
home.
No. You see,
Yes, we
but
did.
no, but you can't stay at the front in the trenches all the time. You got to go back for R&R. But if there's an apparatus in place, that's what we don't have. We don't have a structure. We don't have an organization.
It's almost ad hoc each
Yeah,
time.
every time, every time.
Yeah,
and see, the
that's-
other problem is in the whole political process, like you said, once you become king of the hill, once you become state senator.
Now you got to stay on the hill.
Well, not
Like
only that,
Obama, huh?
you ignore, you do everything you can to stay on the hill, and you forget process, you forget a commitment, you cut corners, you take money on the table, do all these stupid things that
Well, nobody's watching you. I told you the electorate went home.
No, that's the FBI is always watching. As I correct.
No, I'm talking about the grassroots people. The grassroots people.
Well, that's why I say you
remember
got to have an
I was
organization.
working at a polling place on the night of the election for Harold Washington.
Yeah.
They took those ballot boxes out of there. We formed a caravan, and we followed those boxes. We had to take them over to this high school on Drexel Boulevard. King, I think is the name of the high school, to turn them in. There must have been 10 cars. Everybody was watching everybody. Because those ballots were not going to turn, they weren't going to turn off the street and go down another street. We saw them as far as we could have seen them. If we could have, we would have seen them to City Hall and been in there when they counted them, because we wanted to be sure that, no hanky-panky went on. Well, guess what? The next day, when we learned that Harold had become mayor, we all celebrated. But we didn't go back to nothing. We didn't go have no meetings. We didn't go down to visit him. We didn't send him any letters saying we would like for you to work on this, or we have
Gloria,
this
there
interest.
were some of us, including Bennett and Brenetta and Kennon, who said, Harold, keep the momentum going. Let's organize and let's take over the party.
Right.
Why didn't you keep it going?
We tried.
You the task force.
You missed the point. His point is that Harold didn't want to do it.
He didn't want to do it.
And the people that he got to set up some kind of lightweight thing were not really interested in doing
But you
anything.
still had the task force.
Yes, but we never were officially a part of his group. We were he called us the rabble rivals.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah. Well, let me go
But
back
then
to
wouldn't, I think if I'm following your line of thinking somewhat, that perhaps the onus was upon those of us who were not part of that weak group to go ahead and keep the momentum going.
That is true.
On
That
our
is
But
own.
see,
We needed to know we was the dog and not the tail.
No, but see, the problem is, again, when you're outside of the house, it's one attitude and one thing. When you have somebody on the fifth floor, your whole thing changes, and it should. The question is, since we knew, I knew that he set up this group, but I never became part of the group, never was invited, none of that kind of stuff. And so therefore, it took him really 4 years to understand that he had to make a move to consolidate power, not so much for himself, but for himself, yes, but in order to get his program going and improve the lot of the black community.
On the other hand, too, he said, why didn't you guys come on up to me? He said, because when I got in here, all these other people all of a sudden came up
Okay.
around
And,
us.
And they
around
made their
me.
interests known.
Yes, and they wrote us letters and everything. Now, me personally, I said, well, I don't want to be, I know him, we are friends, so I'm not going to go in bothering him. I'm going to let him kind of relax and get himself into the thing, whereas the other people came in, brown nosed and whatever else you want, and put their pressure on him. And you've all heard him say, you guys should have been in here first talking to me about all this
No,
stuff.
but see, those people were hustling.
They were hustlers,
And
that's
we,
right.
That's not wasn't our game.
That's
See,
the point.
The thing what I did for Harold was that he didn't believe that the white power brokers, the business community, would support him.
Mhm.
So me and a guy by the name of James Bidwell, who was executive vice president of Merchandise Mart, the same job that Christopher Kennedy had now, who raised the money for Jane Byrne. He raised Jane Byrne $5 million, whatever it was. So agreed to call these folks together. So Harold would meet with these people once a month. Pat O'Malley, who was head of Canteen Corporation, the guy at First National Bank. In other words,
The
they
guy
all
at the Commonwealth Edison. Was
that's
a part of
right.
That group.
Harris. They're all sitting at the table, and what was interesting, we got Ed Gardner there once. In other words, none of the black folks ever showed up to any of it. Daryl would show up.
Gresham.
Daryl Gresham. But
Parkhouse sausage.
yeah, so that was an important piece. But what I'm trying to say is this: is that unless there was an organization, and that's where we should have moved. Harold should have moved to take over the Democratic Party.
Right.
There's no
right.
reason for him not to. Daley did it.
Right.
I mean, why wouldn't it?
We begged Harold to run for the committeeman of the Fifth Ward,
Yeah.
where he lived. He
Right.
said, I don't want to be
Yeah.
a party position.
Wasn't Leon Dupre the...
No.
What ward was he? Fourth?
He was fifth.
The Fifth Ward, but he
Ward.
wasn't committeeman. He was an alderman.
He was the alderman of the Fifth Ward.
Yeah.
You mentioned him, and you mentioned the support for him, and I remember Leon Dupre because he was a white man who understood human interests. He represented the interests that black people shared more often than many of the black aldermen.
Well, you remember they
Any of
had in the Holman Dupree ordinance. You remember that?
Sure.
The Holman Dupree ordinance was Claude Holman from the Fourth Ward, Leon Dupree from the Fifth Ward, got a open housing bill passed, and then Holman. I don't know what happened to Holman, but he went straight to the trough and never
Never
left.
came back.
Yeah,
Never came back.
He became Uncle Tom personified.
that's right.
And-
Let me tell a story about the backstory about Harold running for mayor. When Harold, you remember, had just been elected as congressman, second term,
Right.
and so he's approached.
About
and he-
overwhelming vote, 98% of the
And
vote.
Harold really liked this election. I mean, he was really skilled and just suited to be a legislator. He's really good at it down in Springfield. And he was, you remember when he went to Congress, he had a committee chair, which was, for a freshman, was like unheard of. So while this stuff was going on, I went up to his office, and he was talking on the phone to somebody about running for mayor. And I said, Harold, you really don't want to be mayor, do you? He said, you got somebody to run? I said, sure, I'll go get Roland. And so I called Roland Burris, and now the state senator, this U.S. senator. I said,
Former
Roland,
comptroller.
former comptroller. I said, Roland, Harold would like to talk to you about running for mayor. And we said I said, why don't you call him and get it together? So Thursday of that week, I called Harold and said, has Roland talked to you? No. I called Roland and said, what's going on? You want to run for mayor? And he said, well, I'm not sure. So we had that Sunday after Harold this is the Sunday before the Wednesday where he's going to make the announcement. We go visit with Roland and Ron Greer. You remember Ron Greer? That was Roland's right-hand man.
Right, exactly.
So Roland and Ron are sitting there. So we're talking about the possibility of Roland running for mayor. And Roland kept talking about how he had led the ticket and how he was really thinking about governor or senator or something like that. And he really wasn't hearing us. So we left, Harold and I left together. And I said, Harold, I don't think he's going to do it. He said, no, he's not going to do it. And one of the things that Harold told me, Roland said, if I decide to run, how much time do I have? So Harold said, if you call me, the first conference, I think it was at noon, if you call me at 11 o'clock on Wednesday, you'll be the candidate. And of course, he never got the call.
Never got the call. Right, right, right.
So Harold really didn't want to run, but you know, he liked campaigning.
Right.
And once he got into it, that was it.
That was it.
He said, "Hey, I'm content where I am. I
Yeah,
really
right.
don't
Oh,
want.
yeah.
Why would I jump out of the
See,
frying
but-
pan to
but
the fire?"
I'm trying to make this point, and that is that it is the grassroots, the voters, who elect people. We elect people because we want people to represent our interests. We want people to defend us. We want people to protect us. We want people to inform us. We want people to serve us. And we have to be vigilant about that. If somebody gets into office and they're comfortable and they're not really serving us, or they're not serving us in the ways or to the extent that we want to be served, then we need to always understand that we are the power behind the throne. We are the people who put these people in. We are also the people who can withdraw our enthusiasm and put somebody else in. That to me is what black political empowerment means. I'm not trying to get you elected so you can add that to your resume. You know, I'm concerned about what's going on right now in the Chicago public schools, where they're talking about laying off hundreds of thousands of teachers in the state university system, where the state is claiming it doesn't have money and they've got to raise tuition and they've got to reduce, you know, personnel and this kind of thing. I'm interested in what's happening in the criminal justice system. We are hemorrhaging young people. They are locked up in prison, you know, and I'm interested in what's going on with the trials of the governor, the trial of John Burge. I want to know that there's somebody somewhere in some of those conversations, somewhere in some of those proceedings, who is looking out for me and my interests. That's why I knock on doors. That's why I neglect, you know, my family and you know, cook quick meals rather than spending all day in the kitchen, because I'm trying to make the world or the city a better place for my children to grow up in. I'm not voting for you because, you know, you all that great a personality. I'm supporting you because I think that you are going to partner with me in helping to make this place a better place for the people that I care about. Beyond that, I have no interest in you, and I could care less about you if you appear not to have any interest in me.
Yeah, but
You made an eloquent statement that's saying basically that power is with the people.
Absolutely.
And you as a person explain something that's totally contrary to the human condition. The average person is not interested in who lives next door. They're not interested in who is an alderman. They are interested in what's going on television. They are interested in whether or not they're going to another paycheck. They only care that if their kid is caught by the police. In other words, and there are other distractions.
Are you saying that you are saying the average, this is the average person, is apathetic?
No, I didn't
And
say
it's
apathetic.
strange, like
Yes,
the
he
person
is.
Dillon
Yes,
said.
he
Apathetic is
is.
the wrong word. They're
Okay.
passionate about who's going to be on television. They're passionate about the Cubs. They're passionate about making sure they get another paycheck. They're passionate about giving that preacher a new car. They're passionate about that. And so,
They're not passionate about their children.
well, I didn't say that. I said they're interested in the kid going to school, but they don't think in broad terms. See, you forget how sophisticated you are. You understand? No, seriously. You understand how the education system works. The average person thinks about the education system as my teacher, Brenetta Howell. That's all they think about. The teacher's good or bad. The average person doesn't really think in terms of whole system, but how it affects them as an individual. For a lot of reasons. One is poor education. One is the fact that we don't have an organization. The fact that we don't have a media to propagandize and so forth. Those are all the flaws in the system that we have to change in order to get further.
But
Then
Gloria,
it's our responsibility then, if we know this to be the case, it's our responsibility to raise the level of awareness of our people so that they can want to have better education, better schools, better police protection, all the stuff that every candidate promises every election. You know, we're always going to get all the four things.
But we've been doing that for 60 years.
Yeah,
but see,
Well,
Gloria,
maybe the problem is we've been doing it in the same ways
And not the right
not
way.
changing.
maybe
There
with
you go.
problems we're not
Times to some
sustaining
extent.
the effort.
Yeah.
But you see, Gloria, here's one of the problems is that for us, for African people all over the world, charisma is a very important part of our appeal to a candidate. And there's nothing wrong with that. Barack Obama, charismatic. We were very enthusiastic about his campaign. Harold Washington, very charismatic. Walked down the street, everybody wanted to talk to Harold. But what we've got to do is make sure that people, that we also, in addition to having charismatic leadership, we got to have leadership that is willing to serve in the way you described.
Public service.
And also people who are willing to give information. I think we suffer from a lack of information. I think Bennett is right. We don't have the kind of media that gives us the information. People are not dumb, and I don't think they're apathetic. They just don't have the information. And I think we need to have people who constantly give information and put it in terms that make sense to people. That's the point.
Okay, I want to disagree a little bit.
And there will be no dissent in this one.
He's the attorney, so we have to listen to him.
People are overwhelmingly apathetic. People are personalizing their lives, but particularly in our community, we don't think in terms of next year. We think in terms hardly beyond next week, but to the end of the month. Other communities think in terms of 10 years. We think in terms, if we're great, in terms of 1 year. But you try to get a person to join a block club today. They're busy with television, my family, my school, everything else. You try to get them to think, keep up with the actual news. The amount of people who actually know the news is remarkable. The number of people who today don't read magazines, don't really watch the news. In the jury selections today, you'll say, what magazine do you read? Well, I don't read. What news do you read? Well, they may read the comments, a certain talking head. If they're really racist, they may look at Limbaugh and those people.
Limbaugh.
But yeah, but as far as having this concern, having the idea of, I'm not thinking in terms of this character, but in terms of the issues. So you throw out, what are the issues? You know, they did ask, they had another poll about the Constitution of the United States. Duh, what is that? No one practically who is not either a professional or who has some kind of sophistication knows what our fundamental basis for our government is. Then they cut out civics. They cut out all of the things that you would learn this from, so that the people coming up, who wants to run for an office today? Nobody wants to run. You have a little core group who are that group who happen to be connected with somebody that they know. But you get the guy on the street, which is why it works itself out into violence in the street, lack of education enough to have jobs, and they don't care about somebody else not having a job. It's all centered right in my own little thing.
But Larry, let's go back
Go
to
ahead.
it. Here's what I think is happening. People are so immersed in their day-to-day lives. It's not that they don't care. It's that, you know, one of the ways in which African American people and African people in general have been oppressed is that we've been fighting on 15 different fronts at the same time.
Yeah.
So in addition to the AIDS fight, we got the economic fight, we got the job fight, we got the, I mean, so you just, it's like you're in a whirlwind at all times. So it's hard then to focus on the news, on anything beyond that week or that year, because you're so oppressed with all these problems that you're surrounded. You and I know in school, for instance, at the university, when students come in and you say, well, why did you miss? Well, I didn't have a babysitter. Well, why didn't I have a babysitter? Well, I didn't have a car to get my child to the babysitter, and I didn't have the money to get on the bus. And so it's a chain of things. So my point is, I agree with you that some people don't know these things and are not concerned about it, but they're surrounded with so many problems.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, I think the ignorance is certainly, ignorance and apathy are not limited just to the
Of course
Black or
not.
African
Of course
American
not.
community.
That's right.
And sometimes if you have a yen for a little humor and you do happen to watch these late night TV comedians on television and hear these guys out on the street just randomly asking questions about
They know
everything
absolutely
from
nothing.
foreign policy to world affairs to the Constitution to the Bill of Rights to just
Grant's
plain
Tomb
old,
Reading.
yes, naming presidents, and it's, makes you want to slap your head when you hear the answers that come from these people of all ages,
Yes.
of all kinds of ratio-ethnic backgrounds,
Yes.
who answer these questions, or some of them can't even stumble onto an answer. So it made me wonder about the training of teachers. Now, I'm in the corner of teachers 1,000%, want them to be well paid, and also to have the kind of mental relaxation they need to have periodically so they can be refreshed and be able to present our children and adults with the right kind of information. But I do have some questions about how teachers are trained and whether they are getting the right kinds of information that they can effectively pass on to children. But I'm thinking also about a story that has gone around for many years about an issue involving the late Franklin Delano Roosevelt, former president, whose wife Eleanor was very interested in an issue, and she had brought in some well-known expert on the issue to try to approach FDR to get him to take some action on this matter. And he said, after the meeting was over, that I'm with you all the way. Now, get out there and make me do it.
Right.
And so that's where I think even with President Obama, that very often we have kind of sat back and been the armchair analyst and haven't organized to make him do some things. I mean, what have you heard? And I'm a former NAACP board member, and currently I'm vice president of the Chicago Committee to Defend the Bill of Rights. So I'm interested in civil rights and civil liberties, probably a little bit more than just, Joe on the corner. But I don't see any of these organizations now really taking, having the metal hit the road, or whatever that expression is.
Metal hit the metal.
Okay, yeah, but really getting to the president some of the kinds of issues, and not just in a critical way, but with some possible solutions. Whatever happened to volunteers, volunteers, for example, domestic volunteers who can do things in our communities. I see all these senior people who have retired, who have skills and knowledge, and they just sit in buildings like the one that I live in. So unless I organize a gathering in our community room, people now call it my living room because nobody else in the building will organize the residents to do something, in that.
But Brenetta, remember now, you were a part of Harold's administration, right? Remember now, and Bennett and I talked about this many times during Harold's administration. People do not want to agitate because they don't want to embarrass Harold. Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
That's the same thing that's happening now. African Americans are suffering. Our needs have not been addressed properly by this president. But people are saying, no, you don't want to embarrass the President of the United States.
And that's part of the survival thing that you talked about earlier.
Precisely.
We realize, I mean, the people you're talking about realize that they have achieved a great victory. They want to savor that victory.
That's right.
Listen, I think I know more about being victimized by this not wanting to be embarrassed. When I was at the very institution from which I retired, there were some policies there that were blatantly, I thought, unfair to students. And so we decided that we needed those policies to be changed. And so we talked to the administration, and the administration was jaded in, they were set in their precious policies. So we said, okay, well then it will be necessary for us to go further with this, because you go to chain of command, so you start where you are, and then you go to the supervisor, and then you go to the supervisor. So they said, but you don't want to do that. See, you don't want to take this complaint, outside, because then you'll be feeding, we have adversaries out there. And so if you go out to complain, then you give our adversaries ammunition, and they will therefore come back and destroy the whole thing. So my feeling was, no, you can change these policies. If you don't change these policies, we're going to change these policies, because we're going to do this very thing that is so dreaded. You got to dread it as much as we do. In other words, not embarrassing. You see, the administration has to not want to be embarrassed, but they also have to not want to be unjust.
Well, see,
and if they don't want to cease being unjust, then we have to resolve that. We have to resolve that. And so we were on our way to resolving it, and it got resolved. But then I became like, a person of,
persona
non grata, because I was one of the voices. But it was simple for them. I mean, these were just things they were married to that they didn't need to be married to, and it was simple to change them. And nothing went down the tubes. Education did not decline and all of that. All their fears were unfounded. But the thing is that that's what you have to understand. And when you talk about teacher training institutions, in my opinion, do not, and I probably can support this with data, do not prepare teachers for the real world that the teachers will be a part of, because the presumption is that the child is a middle class, urban Anglo-Saxon. And whenever you are preparing teachers to teach children that they are not going to see, and they come into a classroom equipped to teach children, which is why inner city studies education came into being.
In the first place.
Because we had 80%, the 80% of the certified teachers were white, and 80% of the student population was black. And there were these teachers who knew nothing about the culture of African Americans, who were actually in some cases afraid of those children. And so they came in and they just managed to survive it. But as far as trying to put forth any special, because they didn't expect the expectations of the children. They didn't expect the children to be intelligent, to be capable of learning, and to be worth the effort. And so the effort was not put forth. I was part of that. I saw it. I fought against it for all those years. But I'm telling you that you got a real situation, because teachers want to teach. They want to know how. They take these classes. They do their best to get the grades. They go in. They want to teach. They are turned into glorified clerks. They spend a whole lot of time filling out reports and forms, and much of the time that they could use for teaching is wasted in that way. But
Gloria and I talked about this when she was on faculty, but and we lamented the fact that higher education and the teacher training institutions have not sat down and said, look, we've got to change the way we do this. It's always putting the blame on the kid, and the kids are the victims. So you blame the victim rather than looking at the way in which you train the people who are supposed to train.
You go into a classroom with low expectations, you're going to get poor results.
That's right.
But in the
Let's
global,
get back to Bob's point earlier.
yeah, I want to get to that too.
About how you handle the situation nationally. See, first of all, when you, I always think of Gil's saying, the uncertain sound, you know.
Oh, yes.
Herman Gilbert wrote a book that says that uses the passage from the Bible. If the trumpet sounds an uncertain sound, who shall prepare to do battle? One of the problems in approaching any kind of conflict is not so much the goal, what you really want as a ideal situation, but what you can do with the resources that you have, and how you can gather more resources to move forward on the issue. When you got a problem like Obama, no matter what you say, he is of African descent.
Right.
No matter what
Who
you say.
said that he was not?
No, listen to what I'm
matter
saying.
what
No, listen to my point. My point is this, is that he is admired by 95% of all the folks in the black people in the
Absolutely.
without any hesitation.
Without any hesitation.
And there's a lot of reasons for it, our history, oppression, etc. So when you approach this guy, you cannot say he is bad. You have to find a way to organize people around, say, helping him, for example, rather than fighting him. And in order to do that, you have to not only have resources, money, and folks willing to devote time to it, but you also have to be aware of the fact that Obama's folks are going to come after you. In other words, they will have peep your whole card, so it won't be any clandestine thing about it. They'll know that you are moving on him in an adversarial way. So you just can't say, I think that we ought to do something about it. You have to plan it. You have to put things in place.
Who said anything about moving on Obama in an adverial way? I'm talking about, people say you are anti-something. No, I am
believe
pro.
you're adversarial. They believe, whenever you get to reach for the crown of the king, they believe that you're adversarial.
But
It goes to
so
what? That means that you have to be prepared for them to not cooperate, to attack you, do everything to destroy you.
It goes to her point about process, though.
That's right.
You got to have the process.
That's right.
And
That's
it
right.
goes with organization and all the other many things that you were talking about.
Absolutely.
Because we want to get to him, and I believe in some instances he wants us to get to him.
And we want him to succeed.
Right,
And we want him to
absolutely.
succeed.
Absolutely.
So, there's two kinds of criticism. There's adverse and constructive. So most people think as soon as you begin criticizing, you're thinking in terms of being adversary. But we also...
Especially people in public office. Especially people in public office.
Yes. Okay.
Well, Harold, to some extent, internalized
Absolutely.
criticism as being against him
Absolutely.
and adversarial.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely,
Well, if
And
I
we-
think improving the schools is in my interest, I have to believe that the person whom I voted for to be president has to share that, or I would not have voted. So I believe
then you
that
didn't
he wants,
agree with his appointment of Arnie Duncan as the Secretary of Education.
I think he misunderstood.
I think he totally
I think
misunderstood.
I think he didn't understand the
No, I think
condition
he
of the
did
Chicago
understand.
public schools,
No, I think
and
he did
consequently did not understand Arnie Duncan.
You see, what you have to remember, our friend Governor Dan Walker, I would never forget when he selected Victor Gracia. Now, Victor Gracia was his go-to guy. And Victor Gracia was racist, was arbitrary. I mean, anything you can think about, that was Victor Gracia. I mean, he's a nice guy. I liked him, but that's the way he operated. When you look around Obama, you see Valerie Jarrett. Who else do you see?
That's right.
His wife.
Right.
Who else do you see? So he has guys around him.
Ron Emanuel, you don't see him?
Yeah, I do. That's
what he
my
means.
exact point.
That's what he
my
means.
exact point.
Who do you see who's black or who has our interests, really?
Ron Emanuel is an Israeli. You know that, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay, so his interests are not consistent with Bob Starr.
Right, exactly.
And so my point being is that, like Walker, the only reason Brenetta was in Walker's cabinet wasn't because he selected her, because we made him do it.
I got you. I got
You remember that?
I remember.
He was at the table. So my point being is that we have to find a way to make it happen, and the process, to organize.
I got you.
It ain't easy, and it ain't going to be easy. And by the time we get it done, he might be out.
But I mean, can you imagine some 300 schools around the nation closing because of lack of money?
Right.
You're talking about 30,000 teachers around the country being laid off.
Right.
From Maine to California.
Only
In this city
30,000?
alone.
Where did I get 100,000 from?
Well, it may be, but that was one of the statistics I heard earlier this year. You're talking about in the city of Chicago. Huberman said he might have to lay off, 3,000 teachers?
Something like that, close to that.
Closing up all the schools.
Yeah.
That's our most
and then,
vital.
of course, you put the schools on the probation because now the children have less of a chance of getting any kind of attention.
Right.
So this means that you have to close more schools.
Right.
Because more schools, someone told me that not only do they have to meet the standard for the school, but every subset in the school. For example, if you have various ethnic groups, every ethnic group has to meet that standard.
Right.
So you couldn't have, say,
right.
one ethnic group who was high and another one who may be middle or low, and that make the whole school have meet this standard. But every subset has to meet the standard, not just the entire
Well, see, I
school.
think that if we want to look at it very simplistically, the problem with this country is we're on a war footing. That all of our money is going to guns and Israel, to kill people, to Iraq and Afghanistan. That's where our money's going.
And our most vital resource is
It's
the
squandered.
education of those coming up. So if there's any money for anything, if you're not preparing for the next generation,
Right.
then you're defeating the whole thing called democracy.
Yeah.
And you'll have a number of people coming in unprepared. We're already saying that our leaders are poor. When you think in terms of leaders who have no opportunity for education because there's no schools, and you talk about the third world countries and all these other countries that don't have schools, we were already up. Now we're deliberately dropping themselves down. And we talked about the dumbing down that you were talking about when you talked on the shows when they're asking for information. And now you're going to say, not only don't you have civics in your school, you don't have a school.
I mean, so Gloria, how is it that we in the city of Chicago allow for the elimination of a requirement of 4 years of public physical education, and we have some of the most obese kids in the country?
And they say, why?
Why is it we allow geography? You know, do you realize that geography is not taught in public schools?
I didn't realize it, but I know that if you ask children where these places
don't know
are, that all
anything.
the money is going to fight all these wars,
No,
they have no idea.
They don't
whether
even know where.
Afghanistan
They
is
don't
in
know
one
where
or not.
Wyoming is.
That's right.
They don't know which coast.
Civics. Civics is no longer taught in the public schools. You and I, all of us.
Art
And forget about
and
music and everything.
Right.
Right.
Those are all vital to a growing, developing mind.
So what makes you think that children are anybody's priority but the community who has the children? You know, and if your priorities have got to count as much as anybody else's priorities.
Sure.
So that, you know, if you talk about they'll come after you, well, you know, mothers of children didn't care about getting come after, because we were trying to do what we thought it was unreasonable and ridiculous for anybody to oppose our trying to improve the quality of education for our children.
I don't think
And
anybody in this group
got
is
those
afraid of
Willis
folks.
wagons off of
Because they
Roosevelt
come after
Road
all of
and
us.
California. Huh?
Wasn't Brenetta arrested for being over in those schools counting those seats back in the Willis days?
No, I wasn't arrested, but I certainly, because I was a PTA president, I was harassed, and my children were harassed about.
Well, just think
Brenetta,
about her running for Congress. She was, when
Rosie
she was on
Simpson.
public aid, running for Congress. And back then, they could just push a button and take you off of public aid. So that's what you call courage in somebody, because they've come after all of us. And we gave as good as we got. I can't
Oh
think.
yes.
But see, the other thing, Gloria,
You better
that's
have it in 2
disturbing to
minutes.
me is that this whole move to privatize
Everything.
public education.
Yeah.
Everything.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Voucher system. We had to fight. State Senator Meeks, we had a big fight about that, wanting to push vouchers.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Right.
Charter schools. I mean, I have nothing against charter schools, but if you go all the way to charter schools, that really destroys the public
Well, what
school
you
system.
do is you make public education so unappealing and so unrewarding that parents are fleeing. They go anywhere, and therefore they don't fight for their schools. We fought for our schools. We fought to get rid of double and triple shifts. We fought to get rid of Willis wagons. We didn't want to go nowhere. We want to go here, down the street from the house, where we could have, our children would be safe, we felt. And we wanted them in classrooms. And we didn't want them in overcrowded classrooms. And we didn't want them in school half a day. So we didn't want some other kind of school system, parallel school system set up to run beside it. We wanted this one fixed. And you have to be sure about what your goals are. You have to decide what it is you want and whether your time on this earth is worth spending to seek that, or whether you just gonna coast and you just gonna sit and watch history be made at the expense of the people that you love, including yourself.
Privatization and exploitation
Exactly.
is exactly where we are right now, and the main thing we should be fighting is privatization. See, the government is supposed to, some of the things you mentioned earlier, the government is supposed to protect its people and guide them and
Inform
permit
them and
to
educate
develop.
them.
Think about the irony of Reagan and his big government, and then in 2008 when the market went down, big government gave all this money to these so-called laissez-faire free market for billions of dollars. It's amazing.
And
so now in the Gulf, these same people are saying,
Same, exactly.
Obama, bring in the big government to
Yeah,
save
right.
us."
Absolutely.
and you give billions, trillions of dollars to the bankers without requiring
Right.
that they give credit
Right.
to little people like us.
Right.
Or
right.
that they even say what they're doing with the billions of
Precisely.
dollars.
Precisely.
See, this 2 hours was not enough. we wound all up now. The show is going on. We just hit on another.